We're worried about all of those germy things out there that we think can hurt us.
As a society, we've become a bit germophobic.
We're getting cleaner and cleaner, thinking that there's additional gain with that.
There has been some controversy over these types of products.
Have we taken the war on germs too far?
This is going to help create good bacteria in your gut.
It's supposed to help your microbiome.
I began to infect myself with worms.
Fecal transplant is probably the most direct way of manipulating the body as an ecosystem.
Putting someone else's poo inside your own bottom, like, what?
Sample comes in this.
I'm glad it's opaque.
Yes.
We all want to stay young forever.
There's an entire industry that is talked into being dissatisfied with ourselves.
But we live in a world full of noise.
Celebrity diets and detox.
Of science versus pop culture. I'm here to change that. Germs have long been associated with illness, and we've been told that exposure to them is something that we should avoid. In our modern world, cleaning and sanitizing are often seen as a way to a healthy life. After all, germs are everywhere, even if we can't see them. And while they might be out of sight, they're never out of mind. What exactly is causing this concern about germs?
I think what comes to mind, when we mean germs, we mean things like bacteria, we mean viruses, maybe little parasites and fungi. We mean all those germy things that we think can hurt us. But what are we afraid of? Is this fear justified?
I'm not going to name any names. I have some friends who are germaphobes.
Do you use the hand sanitizer?
If it's there, I will use it.
Yes. Oh no, you got it right there. A pole in a subway.
Well, I do carry hand sanitizer and I will use it after that.
Do you wipe the toilet seat before you sit down?
No, I just don't sit on it at all.
Oh, you're a squatter.
Yeah.
How about you?
I definitely wipe, yeah. The seat, that is.
Obviously, germs are on people's minds. Have we, as a society, become germophobic? If so, where did our beliefs and fears about germs come from? In the 17th century, Antony van Leeuwenhoek became the first person to see microorganisms through his microscope, so we knew these organisms existed.
But it wasn't until about 1860 when Louis Pasteur really outlined what has been called the germ theory of disease, which is really the idea that microorganisms can hurt us. And with that discovery, there were many, many great advances in public health.
The number of lives that's been saved by vaccines and antibiotics is uncalculable.
Even measures like closed sewage pipes have had a tremendous and beneficial impact on society. There used to be a lot of hookworms and pinworms and other parasites that you'd pick up from the soil. And the reason why we don't have those anymore is public health measures like everyone has to wear shoes.
The advances that were made in that time to really decreased infant mortality and decreased serious diseases, cholera, plague, all that went away. But then we kept going, and we were getting cleaner and cleaner, thinking that there's additional gain with that.
And people all of a sudden started to look at all microbes as being a problem.
Society went from not knowing germs existed to waging a full-out war on them. Suddenly, doorknobs, computers, phones, faucets, and fridges were the battlefields for bacteria.
We're worried about all of those germy things out there that we think can hurt us. So this is kind of personal for me. I'm actually a bit of a germaphobe. I hate sharing food. I am not great with handshakes or hugs. But how afraid of germs should we really be? How afraid of germs should I be? Is all of this justified?
Sanitation, and this has saved millions of lives over the last 150 odd years.
Honestly, without these wonderful devices, we would be in a very, very poor spot when it comes to our health.
Jason, cheers. I don't know if you knew this. I am actually a little bit of a germphobe myself.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
oh, my goodness. Well, I have the perfect thing for you. Here we are.
Oh, no.
There you go.
Yeah, exactly. Am I being irrational? Let's start with toilet seats. Should I be wiping that sucker down?
No, the toilet seat has a very small amount of microbes on it. Usually the places that you're going to get an infection are through your nose and your mouth. So let me ask you this. Have you ever licked a toilet seat?
Not recently or on purpose.
Then don't worry about toilet seats.
Okay, so what about I'm in a hotel room picking up the TV remote?
Because of the time it takes for microbes to die, most likely there's no problem. But give it a good wipe down.
But what do you think about sharing food, sharing drinks, that kind of thing?
If you're perfectly healthy, then there's no problem at all. If you're concerned about sharing a fork or a spoon with somebody, if they're not sick, don't worry about it.
Pole on a subway train.
Unless you're going to put your hand in your mouth right afterwards, you're not going to get enough to cause an infection.
Let's talk about some strategies that have been used to avoid germs. We tried one of them here. And there has been some controversy over these types of products.
When you talk about sanitizers, you really need to just think about alcohol. And if you're thinking about something called antibacterial, then you're thinking about triclosan, which is a chemical that actually is a mild antibiotic. And it shouldn't be in your hands, it should be left on the shelf.
When someone says this is antibacterial, then we think, well, is regular soap and water and washing our hands that we've been doing for all our lives, is that not as effective? But regular soap and hand washing is just as effective to kill the major germs that you actually have out there. And regular soap doesn't actually kill the natural healthy bacteria that you have on your skin.
Overuse of hand sanitizers can be a problem, because if you wipe them off once, they're just going to recolonize you from your same population. But if you keep wiping them out, you're going to clean out all the pores and make new niches for new microbes to invade, including some pretty harmful ones that you might pick up from the environment.
So sometimes our overdependence on antibacterial soaps, for example, means that we're actually in an overkill mode as opposed to just keeping ourselves free of the germs that we're most worried about.
Overkill mode. We've put antibiotic chemicals in sanitizers, soaps, and detergents. And when it comes to medicine, this mentality could be putting us all at risk.
It's good to take antibiotics if you do genuinely have an infection, but because people are so concerned that bacteria and bugs are causing all of these problems, we tend to see an overprescription of antibiotics.
One thing that's problematic is if you take part of a course of antibiotics, but not all of it, what you're doing is you're breeding antibiotic-resistant bacteria that can then go on to infect other people.
If those antibiotics won't work over time because they're not effective enough anymore, because now there's more antimicrobial resistance, it might mean that we actually have less options to treat a person in the future, and that's what we're becoming quite terrified about.
Antibiotic-resistant superbugs aren't just found in hospitals anymore. Certain strains of common infections, from STDs like gonorrhea to urinary tract infections, are increasingly becoming resistant to regular treatments. This has caused the World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Control to release warnings that the usual antibiotics may soon be obsolete, leaving no effective treatment options. So, where does that leave us? Have we taken our war on germs too far? I'm a germaphobe. I just can't help myself. When it comes to my house, I'm out to win the battle and the war against germs.
We're having a more clean lifestyle.
I think as a society, we've become a bit germophobic. We just think that diseases are out there and staying as clean as possible is the best thing that we can do.
All of those antibacterial wipes.
Make sure that everything's spotless, there's no dust.
We become so concerned about cleanliness and hygiene that we're living in overly sanitized environments, and our children are growing up in such an overly sanitized world.
In the first 7 years, as someone is growing up and developing an immune system, you need exposure to a diversity of microbes, because if you don't, then what happens is your immune system is not going to know what to do when it meets something later in life.
As we've become as a society more prone to keeping everything so sterile and clean, we actually, believe it or not, put our health at risk.
Allergies, atopes, obesity, diabetes, chronic diseases. All of these, as we're starting to find out, have a link to the fact that we were avoiding certain types of microbes.
Have we taken the war on germs too far? Where does this leave us?
One of the consequences of over-sanitization is that we're actually seeing a rise in food allergies, gluten insensitivities, and other things.
Diabetes, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. These are increasing dramatically in prevalence over the last 50 years. And during that same time period, we've introduced broad-spectrum antibiotics. We've changed birthing methods. We've changed diet. We've changed how children are breastfed.
Things related to our immune system all seem to be increasing. Asthma particularly had a very large increase from the 50s until 2000.
An increasing body of research suggests that being exposed to germs might actually be good for us.
So the current iteration of the hygiene hypothesis is that cutting ourselves off from the beneficial microbes that we get from contact with healthy people, healthy animals, healthy plants, healthy soil, healthy water, and so on, and maybe contributing to all of the diseases that are increasing dramatically in frequency.
I think there's a balance between being too clean and actually have enough exposure to things that we're supposed to be seeing so that our immune system actually develops in the way it's supposed to. Because there are certain periods in their lives where kids are very susceptible to some germs and other periods in their lives where those germs may be actually helping them develop their immune system. And that's the balance that we need to understand.
It's kind of like coaching a team to fight in a battle. If all of a sudden they see something that they don't recognize, well, you can't really create a defense against that. So it's just going to go haywire all over the place. And that is actually related to many inflammatory diseases that we're seeing.
So PJ, let's put this in super concrete terms. Really, you're saying the gut of a little baby, the kind of germs it's been exposed to, has an impact on asthma and allergies when they grow up.
The interesting thing that we found was that the children who had less dietary exposure actually had increased rates of food allergy. So if you delay that stimulation to the gut in that first 6 months, you're actually seeing those kids develop more food allergy. We used to say, start to give babies pablum when they were 4 months of age. And then we shifted and said, no nut exposure for the first year. Those recommendations are perhaps part of the problem.
So the hygiene hypothesis is really rooted in the idea that we need to have more exposure to certain germs,
Right.
to some kind of dirt. Do we know exactly what germs?
I don't think we fully know the answer to it, yes, but there's some hints. There was some data that came out of East and West Germany, just as the wall was coming down, where the kids who were born in East Germany had very low rates of asthma, whereas the kids who were born in West Germany had very high rates of asthma. And then the interesting thing is, for some reason, that particular scientist looked at their poop. And they showed that there was actually a very large difference in one particular bacteria. And that got us in the community starting to think, what is your largest source of immune stimulation? Your gut.
Emerging evidence suggests our gut and the bacteria inside of it have a significant impact on our immune system. But if we've spent most of our lives in an over-sanitized world, what can we do to increase our exposure to good germs? The wellness industry is worth billions of dollars, with people spending huge sums for the secret to a healthier life. And while hygiene is still on the menu,
hot enough, folks, to kill any dust mites, germs, odors, bacteria.
Good bacteria and probiotics are the new trend.
Kombucha is very good for your digestive health. A lot of people have an imbalance to good to bad bacteria. So this is going to help create good bacteria in your gut. So the better good guys you have on your side, better health you're going to experience, right? So it's good for your microbiome.
Our microbiome. The industry focus is switching from the germs that surround us to those that are in us. Rob, what is the microbiome?
The microbiome is a collection of all the tiny organisms on your body. So ones you've heard of, like bacteria, ones you might not have heard of, and all of those together we collectively call the microbiome.
And these are organisms basically living in our body?
Absolutely, living in our body and on our body.
If you look at the number of organisms and cells in our body, and there's some new data that shows us that we're actually made up more of germs or bacteria than we are of our own selves. So really, what are we?
We have about 30 trillion human cells and about 39 trillion microbial cells. So by that measure, we're only about 43% human.
They are thought to affect everything from our immunity to our mood to our weight. Most people want to increase their amount that they have in their guts to maximize the positive health effects.
And the easiest way to increase those health effects, probiotics.
The basic principle of probiotics is that they're actually trying to improve the healthy bacteria in our guts.
So a probiotic is a live microorganism that has a beneficial effect if it's taken sufficient quantities. And so to qualify as a probiotic, it's got to be a microorganism, it's got to be alive, and it's got to be delivered alive, and it's got to be delivered in sufficient quantity to actually have an impact.
Probiotics have been around forever, but now the food industry has caught on, and you can find everything from probiotic juice to probiotic chocolate and tortilla chips. It's a huge trend.
Okay, I'm gonna do a little taste test of all these different kind of microbiome products, just to get a sense of what's out there. All that's supposed to help your microbiome. This is the kimchi, which I actually kind of love. It is good. So this is fermented, and it's the fermented part of it that's supposed to help your microbiome. And sauerkraut here, and that is pretty darn good. This is your traditional yogurt, and often now sold because it has probiotic qualities to it. Another kind of yogurt, kefir probably doesn't do you any harm. And here we have probiotic gummies. Tastes like gummies. And finally, we have kombucha. Cheers. You know, it just tastes pretty good, to be honest with you. It is incredible how many microbiome products are emerging now. Really, it's part of this gut hype. Sauerkraut and kimchi is, you know, it's been around forever. But now it's a magical food product. Part of this big push in the marketplace to sell products focused on your microbiome.
I don't take a probiotic as a pill, but I've got the probiotic in a kefir, and I put it in my smoothie. I do take a probiotic every day.
I would take them if I take antibiotics. I think they're necessary.
I've heard about probiotics, but I've never tried them myself. Like, I don't fully understand how they work.
For the most part, I think it's a good trend, but you have to really be careful about the probiotic products that you choose. And I'm talking about both probiotic supplements and probiotic fortified foods. Some of those probiotics that you may purchase do not survive the harsh, acidic environment of the stomach. They have to get to your intestines to actually work.
What's your advice to the public about microbiome, gut health, probiotic products?
There's been essentially no work showing that if you're already healthy, that the probiotic is going to make you better than baseline. So it's kind of like if you have an aspirin, it's going to help you if you have a headache, but that doesn't mean that you should just take aspirin all the time to feel better.
Some people who take too many antibiotics, that might kill some of the healthy, good bacteria in our gut. We'd sometimes recommend that they take some probiotics to rebalance their bacteria. But again, if you're not a person who has any significant health conditions, there's no extra advantage from taking probiotics.
It's just like a health halo, like organic or non-GMO. It's like, oh, this must be healthier because it has probiotics.
Certainly, if I had 2 free yogurts that were given to me and one had some probiotics, why not, right? But am I going to go out of my way to spend more money when I don't actually have a problem and need for probiotics? Absolutely not.
Our microbiome is important to our health. Having a healthy gut matters. But can we do anything to change our microbiome? Can we make our microbiome healthier?
There are dozens of different diets aimed at changing and improving your microbiome. The question is, will drastically changing your diet actually help to improve your gut? In the past, I did a celebrity cleanse, and like so many cleanses, it promised to help my gut health.
So I've got my stool sample, and I'm gonna send it off to a laboratory to find out what my poop's made out of, I guess. What we're gonna do is we're gonna try this, and then we're gonna do a test afterwards to see if it's had really any impact on my microbiome, which is basically my fecal matter, my poop. So off we go.
A lot of it felt extreme. It wasn't very fun, that's for sure.
You know, I'm gonna give it a B-. I hope my microbiome appreciates the effort. Week 2 of 3 weeks, I am losing weight. So here I am near the end. It has been a tough process. I hope it's been worth it. Cheers.
When doing the cleanse, I had my microbiome tested before, during, and after. I took these results to get analyzed by Rob Knight, a lead microbiome researcher. What exactly was the effect of my cleanse?
I went on a cleanse. I went on one of these celebrity cleanses that are supposed to have an impact on your microbiome, you know, before, middle, and after. And here are the results.
Yeah, well, what you can see is that your 3 pie charts look pretty similar to each other, and essentially what that's telling you is that you haven't changed very much. So I don't know how extreme your cleanse felt.
It felt extreme. I couldn't have any coffee.
Yeah, that's just not right.
But fair to say, it does demonstrate that the microbiome is pretty resilient.
Absolutely, and your microbiome, like the microbiome of many people, is resilient to this particular insult that you did with the cleanse.
And it was an insult. The cleanse was an insult.
I've heard that about a lot of cleanses. A bunch of people in my lab were very excited about doing cleanses themselves because they were confident that it was going to have huge impacts on their microbiome. And they did all kinds of extreme things like with pepper, with Tabasco sauce, with juice, with even one guy starving himself for 3 days. And like you, they saw extremely modest to 0 results from those various cleanses that they did.
So, my celebrity cleanse didn't change my gut bacteria, but interest in the microbiome only seems to be increasing. Rob's lab is also home to the American Gut Project, where thousands of participants from around the globe send their samples to be tested, allowing Rob and his team to find out more about the microbiome and potentially how to change it.
We're connecting the microbiome to all kinds of things no one had any idea it was involved with. We showed that the microbiome was linked to obesity, cardiovascular disease, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, and even autism, which are all things that you might have had no idea that your gut microbes could even affect.
The American Gut Project has connected the microbiome to numerous diseases, and there are many things that shape it.
What country you're from makes a big difference. So we can even classify people according to whether they're from the US or the UK with essentially perfect accuracy based on their microbiome.
Really?
Yeah, really.
So there is a UK microbiome filled with like Guinness, and then there's a US microbiome filled with, I'm guessing, McDonald's.
It's always easier to tell what the differences are than speculate about the reasons for those differences, but yes. And so in the American Gut Project, one thing that's unique about that is we're asking people hundreds of questions to try to get at a very broad range of different things that might affect the microbiome or might be affected by the microbiome, so we can compare what's a large effect and what's a small effect.
So for some people, their microbiome might be changeable, and for others, not as much.
Correct. So how much it changes is going to be very different depending on a lot of things, like how your microbiome started off. Even the same antibiotic has very different effects on different people. Even if you have the same antibiotic and the same microbe in your gut, whether that antibiotic kills that microbe depends on what other microbes it's with. So there's a lot of things that we're still just starting to understand about how you can change the microbiome. But unlike your human genome, there's nothing you can really do to change it, whereas each of us has profoundly changed our microbiomes, especially in the first 3 years after we were born. But then we continue to change it over time with things like what we eat, who we associate with, what buildings we're in, what contact we have with the soil, the water, plants and animals, and so forth. And so the idea that we can reshape our microbiomes to promote lifelong health is very exciting.
As a society, we've gone from being told that germs will hurt us and should be eradicated to understanding that the germs inside us, our microbiome, are essential and can provide hints to our future health. So, how far will someone go to get the perfect microbiome? The risk of germs isn't black or white. They aren't simply good or bad. New therapies are emerging that promise to improve our health.
I was trained to treat the body as a sterile vessel where you're trying to rid it of bacteria, but now we're starting to understand that it's actually a really complex ecosystem.
And how are they proposing to alter this complex ecosystem?
And fecal transplant is probably, the most direct way of manipulating that ecosystem.
OpenBiome is the first stool bank in the United States, providing doctors across the country and around the globe access to safe, reliable poop.
So Majdi, where are we?
We're in our lab where we process the samples that we get from our donors.
And by samples, you mean poop?
We mean poop, yeah.
And this is all part of really what is the microbiome movement.
Yeah, the public health potential of poop. We're just getting started. C. difficile infection is probably the first area where we've seen the most gains in being able to manipulate the microbiome. So C. difficile is a bacteria that produces a toxin that leads to horrendous diarrhea for many patients who suffer it. And for around 20 to 30,000 patients per year, it can even lead to death.
So this is serious stuff, and almost a cure anyway, is to take fecal matter from another individual and put it in someone who's sick.
There are about 500,000 cases per year, and we know that fecal transplant works in about 80 to 90% of cases.
Okay, so let's pretend I've got the right stuff, okay?
Yep.
I come in, tell me what happens.
Sure, so you'll drop off your sample. The sample comes in this.
I'm glad it's opaque.
Yes. So once that sample is dropped, we'll inspect it. We have this Bristol stool chart for grading poop.
So is this the sweet spot right in here?
The sweet spot, yeah, exactly. So it's between 3 and 5. That's the sweet spot. And then once the sample comes in, it goes through to our lab. It's homogenized or blended. And then it gets inserted into one of our preparations. Our larger preparation is used for low delivery, so that's via colonoscopy. And that's slightly less concentrated than the upper delivery formulation, which is 30 mils. That allows you to deliver the material via a nasogastric tube. And then lastly, we've got the capsule formulation. So the capsules allow the patient to be able to just ingest the fecal transplant at the doctor's office. There are 30 capsules, but most patients are able to tolerate it very well.
So they have to take 30 capsules, and what time span?
Ideally within an hour. Up to 90 minutes is the maximum, but most patients are able to get them in surprisingly quickly. So yeah, it's surprisingly well tolerated, yeah.
It is interesting that we've gone from thinking of poop and germs as entirely harmful, right, to now thinking of them as part of the solution for some problems.
One of the things that we're really interested in is keeping a healthy balance between those two, so we don't sort of swing from this is total taboo, don't touch stool, to let's use stool for everything and give everyone a fecal transplant. This works really well in C. diff, and then people are sort of projecting on to
right.
Works really well here. Microbiome's associated with all these other diseases, so it's got to work really well there. But we have to say, hey, we're not quite there yet, and try to talk people down from the brink of, doing an at-home procedure that might be kind of high risk. So, we're kind of, in many ways, on the front lines of managing public expectations.
Many people aren't willing to wait for the science to come through and are using themselves as guinea pigs.
You are a world champion triathlete, so your health is super important.
Very important. My paycheck depends on that, so I need to be, at the top of my game all the time.
What led you to consider a fecal transplant?
I dealt with a lot of health issues over the years, and being an athlete, a lot of gut issues. As a triathlete, I swim in lots of different bodies of water that can often be contaminated. I have Lyme disease as well. I've gone through multiple rounds of antibiotics. I knew that my gut microbiome was damaged and no amount of probiotics seemed to be helping.
So fecal transplant has been shown to work with C. diff.
Right.
Still experimental in other domains. Right. Did that worry you?
Not at all, because the science behind it made sense to me. I think when your health is so compromised and you're so frustrated at how you feel, you're willing to do anything. For me, it's like, if this is going to make me feel better, I don't care.
So you find the clinic. Tell me about the experience.
I went through sort of colonic first. They kind of
clear things out.
They clear things out, and they have a syringe, and they squirt it up into your colon, and you need to hold that poo in for as long as you can. You know, and 30 minutes passes, I'm like, yeah, you know, because I'm super competitive being an athlete.
You'd be the best poo holder ever.
Totally, I'm like, woo. You continue on this path, essentially, for 5 days. Then you have a break across the weekend, and then you do another 5 days.
How much did this process cost?
Maybe about $10,000.
So not cheap.
No, not cheap.
But for you, worth it?
Totally worth it. Yep, definitely.
And you really did notice the difference
Yes.
pre and post?
Yes, massively, massively.
We are sitting here having a normal conversation about poop, right? How did your friends react to this?
Yeah, they were like, are you friggin' crazy? You're putting someone else's poo inside your own bottom. Like, what? And I think when you get past the squeamishness and you think more like a scientist about it, it makes sense.
There are a lot of people walking around alive now who would be dead had they not got the fecal transplant for their C. diff. But how broadly it's going to generalize to other diseases, we don't know.
There are people that are doing fecal transplants for any range of diseases, and some even for no disease at all. There are risks to this procedure, and we really want to focus on serving patients with like a real unmet need, and not for cosmetic purposes, at least at this stage.
It's an exciting time in the field, but that also generates a lot of hype. At Open Biome, our primary goal is safety, and sometimes if a patient wants an FMT for multiple sclerosis, for example, there's some studies that suggest that might be helpful, but we can't provide that. Or at the moment we only provide it for C. difficile infection, and we're still trying to understand the long-term implications of fecal transplant. Yeah.
We've seen that germs and bacteria play a vital role when it comes to our microbiomes. But what about this? We all have this intuitive reaction to parasites as kind of something that's not good. But research is starting to hint, in some situations, they may be good for us. Vic, tell me a little bit about your personal history that brought you to this area.
I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, and my symptoms started to get progressively worse. The prognosis was that I would need to require surgery to remove my colon if things kind of progressed. That's when I began to embark on a journey to find and to infect myself with what's called Trichuris tricura.
And you're a science-based guy.
I try to be. And I was very clear that I wanted to pursue this particular species of worms because I felt that the risk profile was significantly less than other types of worms. This worm itself is confined to the luminal tract, the digestive tract. And the documented side effects is essentially the same symptoms as what I was having as an ulcerative colitis patient. And so from a risk standpoint, it made a lot of sense.
So Vic, you look healthy now. What has been the impact on you?
I basically was able to get off of the medicines that I had been taking for a long time and have no symptoms related to this condition.
Do you attribute some of that health to the parasite?
I wasn't sure that the worms were what was causing it, so I wanted to have myself studied.
Vic reached out to parasite immunologist Ping Lok, currently at NYU, to try to find out what happened inside his gut. What was your first impression? Did you think he was crazy, or did you think that maybe there's something here?
So the idea that worms could be beneficial was already around the literature at the time. But here was someone who had deliberately infected himself to treat his own disease. And according to him at the time, had completely put his disease into the remission. I was actually blown away, and that just kind of changed the direction of my lab.
So let's talk a little bit about how worms could be beneficial for an individual with a disease or an ailment like Vic.
See, what happens during colitis is you get immune response against your own gut bacteria that causes damage to the gut. And this bacteria can then get into your tissues. What we think right now is that the worms induce an immune response that restores the mucus barrier to the gut to prevent bacteria from translocating. The worms can also change the type of bacteria you have in the gut. So the worms can actually increase bacteria that's anti-inflammatory, and the anti-inflammatory bacteria can outcompete the inflammatory bacteria.
Very, very exciting area of research, but people should be cautious, right?
There's a lot of variation in how people respond to a worm infection. So there are some people that get very sick from the worms because they have a very weak immune response. But then there are also people who mount too strong of an immune response against the worms and ends up destroying the tissue as a result. I think of Vic now as being an extreme responder, someone that was just lucky enough to really benefit from the worm infection.
So while the research remains preliminary in this area, there are many people that are interested in this possible therapy. In fact, desperate patients are seeking parasites from all over the world.
Science moves slowly, and for parents looking for answers now, the wait can be unbearable. Something Judith, a mom with an autistic son, knows all too well.
This was where they looked at what are really truly the potential causes of autism. And right here we have the biome depletion theory.
So you're a little bit of a citizen scientist. You're not just a mom, but also you're exploring the literature yourself.
Yeah. I mean, you have to. In the 22 years since my son was diagnosed, there is not one single new treatment for autism. So what other choice do I have? I'm going to educate myself so that I can make the most intelligent decisions possible for him. From the time he was 3 years old, he had been diagnosed to have a certain kind of an immune deficiency and had been on a very invasive treatment for 8 years at this point. And then in 1999, I was reading the New York Times, and there was an article in the Science Times called "In Pursuit of an Autoimmune Worm Cure." And it described the immune system changes that are effected by adding back things like these porcine whipworms. And it was like exactly matching what I was coming to understand was wrong with my son. Everything changed from that moment. It was like I had found the missing piece.
How did you find the eggs? What was that journey like?
You could buy them online. They were phenomenally expensive. At that time, they were about $12,000 a year. And these was not going to be covered, obviously, by insurance. When they arrived, I started to give them to my son. Within 10 weeks, I started to notice that his perpetual belly bloating started to go down. The really exciting moment came for me after he had been on them for a good 6 months. It brought him out of his shell. He suddenly didn't want to not be with people. He wanted to communicate. He wanted to participate in my life and our lives. And I couldn't really ask for more than that. It's not like it's a cure, but it was a noticeable, measurable improvement in him. Considering that there's nothing out there to help anybody with autism other than antipsychotic medications, which is the only thing that's on label for autism, the effects of this are really quite profound. When I realized that I needed to do this continually and I could no longer afford it, I had to start looking around the world to try to find an alternative. We decided to start a company in the UK that would sell this organism and make it safely and affordably available.
Tell me a little bit about the mechanics of that. How does that work?
The organism itself is called a cysticercoid. It's mostly microscopic. It comes in a tiny little vial with about 1 milliliter of what looks like water with specks in it. And once every 2 or 3 weeks or so, people take a little dose of that. For a vial of 30 organisms, if you take that every 2 weeks, it's going to cost you about $600 a year.
From your company?
Correct.
Okay, that's a big difference.
Yeah, we're doing our best.
So what are some of the most frustrating misconceptions that you come across regarding this therapy?
People have an instinctive fear of parasite. I would hope that over time, the same way that people kind of became used to the idea that yogurt is full of billions of bacteria. With every delicious spoonful, people will come to understand that we're not talking about, 30-foot tapeworms, that we're talking about, small amounts of therapeutic organisms, that there's nothing disgusting, there's nothing to see, and that it's doing you a whole lot of good.
While Judith believes she is seeing improvements, it's important to note that this treatment is still unproven.
Was it too crude to say that maybe it's good for you to have a few parasites at some stage in your life?
Well, we don't know that yet, right? And obviously, parasites themselves can cause a lot of harm. So the WHO is trying to eradicate worms, and there's a good reason for that. I completely understand the people for whom they feel that there's nothing else they can do but try parasites, and I completely understand that. But there's still a lot of things we don't understand, and I think that's why science moves really slowly, is because we really have to be sure that we're not causing harm to people instead of doing something good for them.
Look, there's no doubt that there are germs that are bad, and our advances in sanitation remain important and critical. But our relationship with germs, I think, is evolving.
What's happening is we're moving away from the war metaphor where every germ is an invader and more to the idea that we have a lot of beneficial microbes as well as harmful microbes. And we need to think much more about ourselves as an ecosystem that we're going to maintain over time, rather than as a battleground that we have to clear all of the invaders from.
As a society, right, our pop culture phenomenon has basically tried to, paint certain things as kind of either or. Now we're actually realizing that, we have a balance. We actually have healthy bacteria on our skin, healthy bacteria in our gut. They've existed with us for a long time, and some of them actually help us get stronger, but the key is some of them won't, and that's why we need to maintain that balance of hygiene.
So that doesn't mean we never clean or we drink water out of a ditch. Obviously, we don't want to go back to having the diseases that we were very effectively able to eradicate. We're just saying we need to be more balanced in what we're eating, in what we're putting into our kids' environment.
So if we could somehow train our immune systems properly without risking dangerous infections, that really should be the goal, right?
This is why we want to encourage that we don't over-sanitize our environments, because actually that early exposure to some bacteria and just regular foods actually can help us develop a stronger immune system as we age.
What kind of practical advice do you give parents?
I think it's hard for family doctors and general practitioners to give people really good advice right now, because things are changing. What we were taught in medical school is no longer valid. We used to tell people to avoid nuts for the first year of life, and that's gone out the window. We don't say that anymore. I really struggle with that in terms of what is the message for the public. I think at this point, if you don't have asthma and allergies, go out there, live life, and don't avoid things. I don't think there's any evidence that you need to.
When it comes to germs, perhaps the war is over. Maybe it's time for a kind of peace and embracing of a more nuanced relationship with these microscopic organisms.
We recommend that people maintain reasonable hygiene, soap and water, and not necessarily go crazy with the sanitizers and the antibacterial soap.
Just have some common sense. If you sneeze, use your elbow and use tissues and throw them away and wash your hands.
You hear these media reports that say germs in hotel rooms horrific, germs in this situation horrific. But people aren't really dying from exposure from this. In some ways, it's a story of our tolerance to these germs.
Oh, exactly. Germs are everywhere. We're never getting rid of them. So what we need to do is just make sure that the ones that are bad, we just avoid. The ones that are good, the ones that are harmless, we embrace them.
What about the famous 5-second rule?
It depends on what it is, and it depends on what floor it falls on.
So it's okay to pick up the sandwich that's fallen on the floor and just go at it?
If it was in my office or at home, I'd eat that sandwich, but not so much if it was in a hospital.
Do you believe in the 5-second rule?
I don't tell my kids that they can't eat stuff off the floor anymore.
While cleanliness will always have a role to play in our health, when it comes to cheating death, we might want to relax and learn to love our germs.
To be honest with you, I think it's time for me to reevaluate my relationship with germs.